Okay. Evening, everyone. Can be seated. For those of you who are joining us here, and welcome to those online who are watching us here at either peacefulsolution.org or on our official Peaceful Solution Facebook page. Welcome to another evening, Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Teacher Certification course. We are going to be continuing in the advanced series here. We're in chapter 5, which is the last chapter of the advanced series. The intermediate have 7 chapters and the advanced has 5. Character unit here of the building moral excellence. And of course, we're talking about, character and the world and society here. Character, society, and the world. And we've been covering some of the things here and looking at how the choices that people make, especially when they get up into kind of the higher offices within the community, whether they're in business or public leaders, community leaders, the political leaders, their decisions can actually have a negative impact on their community, their constituents, their consumers, and so forth, and it can erode what's called public trust. Okay, and so one of the things that, and we're going to see that as we move forward, we're going to cover some of the other information, some articles and things like that kind of, things that have taken place in society and the world since this book was written in 2003, published in 2003, I believe. Information gathered a little bit before that, but we can see throughout the years how there's been some pretty large corporations, pretty large well publicized events that have taken place because of mismanagement, because of dishonesty, because of deception and fraud and things like that. And of course, these are things that are representative of the individual's character. Now, of course, when it comes to the news, it seems like, everybody wants a fall guy or a fall woman or somebody to blame or somebody to point the finger at when it comes to something bad going wrong, Of course, when something great goes right, they want to, everybody wants their piece of the pie, they want their credit, to come to them in that regards. But, the truth is, I remember at a conference once, the author of the Peaceful Solution was speaking about, an individual that had been indicted on some charges. And he said, that person is not guilty of those charges because they've never been trained in positive moral character development. And from the outside looking in, it's easy to look and see, oh, that person is guilty, put them in jail and throw the book at them, lock away the keys. But really, in all actuality, until a person has been trained and given the opportunity to know the difference between what's right and wrong, and the opportunity to practice it over a period of time, they're really not guilty, because who knows? Remember what we learned at the very first onset of this intermediate through advanced series is that there's a lot of factors that go into the making of our character, and our upbringing, our environment, our genetics, values, and so forth. They all contribute to that. And people typically do what they see those in authority do. And it's easy to look and go, well, they should have known better. They shouldn't have done that. Well, were they taught that? Have they been taught the value of doing what's right and shown through education the consequences of doing what's wrong? Because these things weren't always shown in the education system. At least not public schools. I don't know too much about private school. I never went to a private school. The colleges, and even in the workforce, there's a certain degree of expectations that the workforce desires when they're looking for an employer. They want someone who's honest, who's trustworthy, who's responsible, who's self-motivated, who works well with others. And those are great qualities to desire to have, but who's out there teaching people to develop these characteristics? Who's out there showing and pointing them in the right direction and saying, hey, this is not right, and this is going to bring this type of consequence if you continue to follow this. Or, hey, what you're doing right here, that's great. in maintaining this characteristic, this is how you can benefit yourself and others. Well, not very many places out there that are doing that. And so people, they become the product of their environment by default, because that environment is also a source of education for them. Something's got to go into those neurons, especially in the first 7 or so years of a child's life. They're kind of in that programming stage, and that doesn't necessarily set the course, but it sets the precursors for how they perceive the world around them until, they're taught differently. So a lot of these things that we're covering and we're seeing, we're going to talk a little bit more about Enron today, and you can just look out in the news, Financial Times or Bloomberg or all these different publications that are out there online, on the television. I think even they still have newspapers still. I don't know if they still have a print version of the Wall Street Journal. I remember delivering those things back in like 2001, 2002. Yeah, I was actually a paper boy. Paper man. I was a paper man. I was over 20 when I was doing it. But and I didn't ride a bike. I drove a vehicle. But people depend on these things to make decisions financially. And one of the big factors is the decision makers in those companies, right? If they have a great reputation of making great decisions and being honest and increasing public trustworthiness and so forth, people are more likely to invest in them. If it's the opposite, well, they're going to steer a little bit clear from them. But the thing that a lot of people don't see is that when people draw back from investing in a company, it doesn't just affect that CEO or that CFO or that, president or whoever is that chairman or whatever of the board. It affects all the other people that rely on that company to make a living. Like we're going to see here, the huge amount of people that were affected by the fall of Enron here. Let me get these here set up. All right. So we left off on page, that first paragraph there on page 192. We were talking about character shapes society, and we should still be, let me just double check here in our procedure. We were in procedure 6. All right. Yeah, so we're still in procedure 6 here, where we started on page 191, because we're still talking about character and how character shapes society. So let's look over page 192 here. Let's look at the second paragraph. It says, of course, this is only a simple example. Let's back up a little bit just to set the pace here so we're not just picking up mid-sentence. Go back to page 191 and look at the beginning of the last paragraph there on the bottom. For individuals and businesses to invest money in a company or corporation, there must be an element of trust and confidence in the integrity of what they are investing in. For example, your friend is starting a small business. He asks you to help him by contributing $100 to buy merchandise that he will then sell to the public for a profit. He also tells you that his business is sure to do well and that you will not only get your $100 returned, in addition, you will get a certain percentage of the profits. If your friend is honest and uses your money in the manner in which he said he would, then he would have made, or you would have made, a great investment. However, if he uses the money for another purpose unrelated to his business, then he has been dishonest and you would have made a poor investment. How would your trust in him be affected? Like if you go over to his house and you ask about how the investment, your investment is coming along, only to find out that you didn't realize that you had invested in Budweiser because that's what's in this refrigerator. That's what his $100 went to go and invest with, And sometimes people are they talk a great talk, talk a great game, but their actions don't back it up. And typically they have to continually find new people to get them to, it's not really an investment. They think they're investing in the person or the project or the idea or whatever, but it's really a dupe. It's a scam. It's a fraud, because their intention is not really to produce this next greatest idea that's going to revolutionize the market. Okay. And eventually they do get a reputation. Those type of people, they tend to bounce around in different locations. They don't stay in one place, because everybody eventually knows, oh, that guy over there, yeah, he's always trying to scam people out of money. He invented a better eraser, that's going to revolutionize erasing things, or, he's going to make popular the square tire, it's only flat on the bottom. So in this case, your trust in him would probably be affected in a negative way. You won't be able to trust a guy like that, right? Of course, this leads us to where we left off last week. Of course, this is only a simple example, but every day, billions of dollars are invested in corporations and businesses in much the same manner. These investors depend on the honesty of each other and the diligence of their employees to make the organization successful for the community. They are then able to help support and create other businesses by using their profits to invest in other companies. And that's, I was just reading a little bit earlier about, what was the guy's name? The Asa, the Coca-Cola guy. I can't remember his name, but not the Pemberton, the guy that came up with the formula, but the person that actually bought it from him. A lot of the money that he made in the investments kind of helped build up, Atlanta, Georgia, back in the 1800s or so. So when people get into business, and we kind of saw this rush of the Industrial Revolution when you had the railroads and steel and oil and so forth, we saw a huge upsurge in the building of cities and infrastructures and roadways and so forth, economic investments going back into, towns and states and so forth. And we saw a radical growth, and it increased, brought about a lot of work for people, because things were going well, things were profitable. But when they don't, then we see what takes place, like we saw in the time period of the stock market crash and so forth. So they depend on these people to be honest. They are then able to help support and create other businesses by using their profits to invest in other companies. It's like in the business world, they have business to business funding or business to business lending. They have resources where business owners can go a non-traditional way of getting capital to expand their business or purchase equipment and so forth, that they otherwise would not be able to get from a traditional bank, right? And the businesses that lend that money to them, they of course expect a return on their investment. Sometimes it's a certain percentage rate because it's a shorter term loan. Sometimes it's a percentage of the profits and so forth, but in some way they're getting some type of return on their investment, because to them it is an investment thing. There's nothing wrong with investing your money and making a little bit of a profit on it. This in turn creates more jobs and opportunities for people to care for their immediate needs and to prepare for their futures through pension plans and retirement funds. Pension plans and retirement funds. That kind of is a little bit of a joke today, because we've seen a huge surge in the cost of living here, at least in the United States. And it's funny because I've been watching a lot of people, they've been actually leaving the United States and moving to different countries because the cost of living is just much, 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 much less. Everything from electricity to rent, to internet, food, the cost of living for food, and transportation. It's just they report how much less it is, you know, compared to living here in the United States. And of course, everybody's chasing the American dream, but that comes with the great expense um, of its own. And thinking about that, retirement, I think the average age, well, I don't know really what the average age anymore is. People are working longer and longer. A lot of people who went into retirement because of the increased cost of living have had to come out of retirement and to get a part-time job or something like that, sometimes a full-time job, because they can't just afford their basic needs, And it's like, could you imagine working 30, 40 something years of your life, and now you're thinking about, I've saved money and I'm about to retire and relax and do some of the things that I really want to do, only to have to go back into the workforce because the cost of living is so high, or your retirement fund didn't build like you were hoping your financial investor advisor said that they would. But just looking here, the average amount needed to retire comfortably in the United States, and this was from CNBC.com, and this was from a report from 2023. It says, while U.S. retirees might move states to be closer to family or for warmer weather, living costs can be a big factor too. The annual cost to retire comfortably varies by as much as $66,000 between states. So just depending, from the highest to the lowest state. With Hawaii costing the most by far. Now, it might be one of the prettiest places. I'm not sure. I've never been to Hawaii. I've only seen pictures of Hawaii. But most of the things that are in Hawaii have to be brought there by boat or plane. So there's an increased cost with that. According to a recent GeoBank rate analysis of retirement expenses in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Now, what they found is to determine the annual retirement cost for Americans age 65 and older in each state, the study used the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates for food, shelter, transportation, healthcare, and utility costs. An additional cash buffer of 20% of that total was added to ensure that retirees would be, and they have in quotation marks, comfortable according to the study. Now, Hawaii, as we said, has the highest annual retirement expenses in the country, costing retirees an estimated, now just keep this in mind, if you are thinking about going and retiring in Hawaii, right? It's going to cost you an estimated $121,228 annually just to live comfortably. Now you could go and what do they call it? Nomad it, be a beach bum or something like that, and just move from beach to beach and so forth, and eat pineapples and coconuts and so forth. But I think that'd probably get old a little bit after a while. At least Hawaii is a pretty temperate climate all year round. I wouldn't recommend that in some place like Michigan or, Pennsylvania or anything like that. But $121,000 annually. It's also the only state or district where retirees need to spend six figures in order to have this comfort. The Aloha State cost of living is high for all residents, largely due to higher transportation expenditures, as most things are shipped via sea. Now it says here Hawaii contrasts sharply with Mississippi. And everybody remembers how you learn how to spell that. M-I, crick letter, I-P-P-I. You don't remember that? Nobody went through that in school? Oh, my heavens. Okay. Maybe I just went to a different school. We went to different schools together. Now, Mississippi has the lowest retirement expenses in the country, costing retirees $55,074 annually. And of course, there's things because, home prices, property taxes, and so forth are the lowest in the U.S., which helps retirement costs stay low. Now, just in case you're wondering, in Texas, it's around $60,000 annually to live comfortably, which is it's right around $5,000 a month. And that's with that 20% buffer, right? That 20% buffer that they add on to the cost of living, to have that comfort. Just thinking about this, because I was wondering, here we are in 2025, and of course we have had inflation. We have had everything seems to just go up in price, for our average living. But in 2025, the average U.S. income is approximately $59,436. Now, why is that important? Because, there's a certain portion of that when you're thinking about retirement that either you're going to have to save out of your pay, right, personally, or you're going to have to put into some type of investment in order to get to this, 60 or $100,000 or whatever it is. Now, back in 1925, for a comparison, have anybody that remembers this? Anybody from 1925? No? Okay. I didn't think so. You all look young and spry out there. The average U.S. income in 1925 was $5,425, right? The average rent in 1925 was like around $60 to $70 a month. You believe it or not, you could actually get a New York City apartment for $60 a month in 1925. I think it probably cost you about $2,000 a month for 400 square feet now that you probably have to share with somebody in order to split the cost. But the cost of living was way lower back then. And of course, they had other factors involved with that, 60 or $70 probably was kind of pushing the limit. They say that one of the largest expenses, monthly expenses for people is their living expenses. That's some of the big things that they have to pay for. Now, if you've got a house that was left to you by, a parent, or you inherited, or you're able to, save up and have it all paid for by the time you retire, well, then that's one less expense that you're going to have. There's other things like taxes and, insurance and maintenance and so forth, but it's not as much as paying a mortgage. So those are some of the things that you have to take into consideration. And when people are able to invest back within the community by investing in other companies, then you look at it kind of like a seed, right? And you take one seed. That's all it takes, generally speaking. It just takes one seed of any particular plant. Let's take an apple, right? Take an apple seed and you plant that in the ground. Now you get it to sprout up, and you give it the proper environment, the food and the nutrients, and protect it from the animals that like to come and munch on them and so forth. Then eventually that apple seedling will grow into a tree. Now you think about that, like you have invested in that one seed, and that one seed creates a tree that gives you hundreds of apples every year. And in those hundreds of apples, you have however many seeds you get within those apples. So you could potentially have thousands of opportunities, right? And this is how investments are. You take one investment and it can grow and bring you a greater yield or a greater return on that investment. Now, that's if the seed grows. If it produces what it's designed to produce. Well, it's the same with people. If people don't do what they say they're going to do, then the investment becomes lost. All the time, all the energy, all the resources, they become a loss. It's not just the loss of that one thing, but everything that's involved with making that investment to begin with. So let's look at the next paragraph there. It says, in large corporations, there are many different departments. Many different departments. For example, there may be financial, public relations, and advertising departments, just to name a few. Each department has leaders or managers who guide and direct their employees towards specific goals. All right. So you have different types of departments within a large corporation. And those departments are, like we see here, financial or even public relations. Now this kind of sticks out to me a little bit because we're talking about trust, right? There has to be trust within that company, because even if somebody's not making some huge investment, I've got, X amount of dollars and I'm looking to invest in this company to get a return on my investment. The consumers are investing in that company. when they purchase products from that company. It's an investment in that company for those products that are going to do some type of a benefit for them. And the image of that company kind of determines what people are willing to spend on. People put their money, in places that are important to them. It was funny because, and I didn't realize this until later, but it was one particular water company that had they had got caught up at some things. I don't know if it had to do with their water source, or if it had to do with the Michigan problem in Flint and so forth. But it was funny because during the pandemic, when everything was flying off the shelf, people were buying toilet paper, they were buying all the water. You walk into Walmart and you walk down the water aisle, and it was like the apocalypse that came or something like that. There was no water, but there would be pallets and pallets and pallets of this one particular brand of water company. Even during the time period where this stuff was somewhat scarce for what people could buy from a bottle. Now, they still had, water, if you had water filters at your house or in the pitcher, and whole house purification system or whatever. But people didn't even want to buy it then. They didn't even want to spend the money on it because of the reputation of that company. And it had to do with the water source. It didn't have to do with a corporate decision. It wasn't the person or something like that, but it had to do with their water source. So, companies spend a lot of money every year. In fact, companies, large corporations, they'll pay millions of dollars in marketing, advertisement, which actually is two different things, and public relations, right? Public relations, how they're perceived in the eyes of their consumers, okay? And a public relations department, it's a company's relationship with the public. Of course, it's a critical part of their image, and as such, most companies today spend significant resources on maintaining a positive relationship with potential customers. And their goal is always to get a new customer. First, they want to get customers, then they want to retain those customers. So they have to continue to deliver on what brought the customers there to begin with. And then their goal is to expand their share, what they call their market share, and get more customers, right? And I always get a little bit, snickery when I see one of my vendors, offering these great deals to new customers. You can get this for only $20 more. Like, hey, what about me? I like that deal too, but their goal is to show, well, we already got you. You just keep paying top dollar, but they want to get new customers in so they can get them to pay top dollar too. And but they don't offer those deals to the existing members. Sometimes they do, but anyway, but they want to maintain positive relationships with potential customers. Public relations, or PR, is the branch of a business that manages the release and exchange of information between the company and the general public. And it's PR's job to ensure the story that gets told is a positive one. All right. And so that's the part of the duty of the public relations department. Then you have like advertising, right? Everybody knows about advertisements. When I was growing up, everybody looked forward to getting the Sunday paper. In Cleveland, the Cleveland Plain Dealer was the big paper that we had up there. I mean, and that paper was probably about that thick, the Sunday Plain Dealer. And, it had the headlines and the front page and the business and the world and the international and the national news and, stocks and all this stuff. Of course, I wanted to get to the toy section so I could read that, and see what the sales were and try to convince mom to take me there, that day. But in there, the wives, and I'm sure probably husbands too, they wanted to get to the advertisements, right? Because what's advertised are things that what people want to buy. Things at the grocery store, things at the sports store, things at the parts store, things at the furniture store, and so forth. And companies spend a lot of money advertising and trying to convince their potential customers, hey, we're the best. We have the best prices, the best service, the best products, come to us. And there's been some pretty, interesting advertising and marketing campaigns over the years. That's very, very clever. But their goal is to get those customers. But It's not just about sticking information out there to draw people in, because the government actually regulates what and how companies can advertise. There's rules in place, particularly to protect the consumer, right? And to govern the trade practices of businesses, because, if there were no rules, remember what rules are there for? They're there to keep us safe, okay? Even if we don't realize it, those rules are there to keep us safe. And there have been people throughout the years that have engaged in immoral or unscrupulous advertising and marketing campaigns that duped a lot of people out of thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and the advertising in most cases are governed by the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission. And its purpose is to protect consumers from fraud and deception. That's one of the main things that it's designed there for, because you have big corporations and they put out something that's it's a little bit untrue. It's not totally untrue, it's just a little bit untrue. They know that most consumers don't have the resources to bring a suit against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And normally they don't, because the product that they purchased might have only been like $50-$60 or something like that. So who's going to waste the time? Well, that's when you see things like class action lawsuits, right? There's a group of people who've had this same problem with this product that they've known about for years, and they still promote it as a great product that you can use without any problems, but it produces the same problem. Nobody does anything about it. So then they bring in these class action lawsuits. So another purpose of the FTC is to ensure environmentally friendly products, which they have what they call green guides. And the FTC's endorsement guides being upfront with customers and shows customers what they need to know about gift cards. I guess there's been some defrauding and so forth of that as well. Well, it's actually, like I said here, you have that governs that, the Federal Trade Commission, and then you also have codes on the U.S. law book that governs the dissemination or the spreading out of false advertisements. And you can go online and you can find this. It's a U.S. code, whatever this squiggly SS thing is, 52. And it's dissemination of false advertisements. In A, it says unlawfulness. It shall be unlawful for any person, partnership, or corporation to disseminate or cause to be disseminated any false advertisements, right? Any false advertisement. So again, this is to protect the consumer. Remember what the FTC's goal is. First thing is to protect the consumer from fraud and deceit. And these are the ways that it governs from false advertisement. United States mail, that's MAIL, not MALE, or in having effect upon commerce by any means for the purpose of inducing, or which is likely to induce, directly or indirectly, the purchase of food, drugs, devices, services, or cosmetics. So these are the things that govern, it's unlawful to disseminate or cause this false advertisement to be disseminated by means for the purpose of inducing, or which is likely to induce, directly or indirectly, the purchase in or having an effect upon commerce of food, drug, devices, services, or cosmetics. Okay, and this is what that law governs. It says unfair or deceptive practice, the dissemination or causing to be disseminated of any false advertisement within the provisions of subsection A of this section shall be unfair or deceptive act or practice in or affecting commerce within the meaning, and then they give another title there. And so, even the United States has laws governing advertising practices, which they don't call it that, but it ties into morals, right? Being honest, being trustworthy, right? Being reliable, and so forth. All right, let's see here. So we talked a little bit about public relations there. I don't think we need to go into any more on that. Let's look back on page 192. The success and ability of these corporations are largely dependent on the character of those who hold leadership positions and are in charge of their various departments. When those who are in charge of are financially unethical and irresponsible, the results can be devastating to their employees and society alike. Every year, hundreds of companies go out of business or file bankruptcy because of theft in the form of embezzlement and fraud from within the company. And that's embezzling is stealing from, money, funds from within the company unlawfully. Remember that theft in any form is an immoral choice that ripples outward, affecting many others. The Enron company is an example of how the immoral choice of theft can affect a society. And some of these people who we've seen over the years who have gotten into trouble with the law because of embezzlement and other forms of theft or fraud, in their mind, a lot of them really thought that if they can use this money from the corporation and invest it in something else that will help them get out of their financial situation, the profits that they have from that will give them money and enable them to put that money back. But the problem is it becomes addictive, especially when you're not caught. When you're not caught, right? It's only illegal if someone catches you. No, the true test of self-control is what you do when no one's looking. Morality should reside within the person's character 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, irregardless of who's around them or what situation or what position they might be in. If you're the leader of a company, you should be, upholding these rules with the utmost diligence, because the way you govern yourself and how you practice, your trade and your interactions with others is going to kind of set the pace for the rest of your company. Well, I've seen the big boss do it. He drives in the parking lot at 100 miles an hour. So why can't I drive in the parking lot at 100 miles an hour? That's a out there example, but people do look at those types of things. And the problem with it is, people get into financial problems and they think they can kind of sneak and take a little bit of money here, take a little bit of money there, invest it on the horse that does his business before the race, in hopes that that horse is going to win, but he doesn't. So, man, if I could just sneak another 20 grand and another 10 grand and another grand, another 5,000, the next thing you know, they're $160,000 in the hole. How do they fix it? And sometimes these are people who are in trusted positions, not always accountant, not always CEO. Sometimes it's accountants, because they're the ones that are handling the books. And they do what they call cooking the books. And they make the numbers look like something that they really aren't. While in the meantime, they're stuffing a little bit in their pocket, right? Those things always catch up, because sometimes companies are smart enough to have audits within their own companies. They'll bring in an outside accounting firm to do an audit because something's just not adding up. And that's when people get in trouble. Well, technically, they were in trouble long before the auditors came in, because their character led them to those choices. All right, so let's look at page 193 here. Talk about the fall of Enron. Now, this was back in December of 2001. And a lot of young people weren't even alive at that time, but I remember that. I remember, like William said, we had traveled down to Houston, and I wasn't with the group of the young men, but I remember driving by the big Enron building and seeing how huge and massive it was, and understanding, that it generated a lot of money, billions and billions and billions of dollars, and the community and the financial world had a lot of trust in them. But that trust was quickly eroded, as we're going to see here in this article, under the fall of Enron. It says Enron, the 7th largest company in the United States. Now think about that. 7th largest company in the United States. We know we're dealing with billions and billions and billions of dollars, to be that large. It grew in less than 2 decades from a small Midwestern pipeline company into the world's largest energy trader. Over the years, Enron built the reputation of being a sound investment and earned, notice here, the public's trust. With this trust and reputation, many people bought stocks or shares that enabled the company to become even more successful. And this is what you see, like you'll see high earners, people that are CEOs, or they people like Warren Buffett and all these other characters, some of the big names that are out, and Zuckerberg and Bezos and Musk and so forth. These people, both there's men and women there too, a part of their net worth is based on the value of their stock price, right? And as long as the public is trusting, because those guys don't have $400 billion sitting in a bank account somewhere, when they say their net worth. If that stock, which they do, they fluctuate up and down, and a lot of it's based on what the public perceives, right? If they think finances or the financial market's going, or this company's having a lot of problems with their product or their service, or their CEO's in trouble, then they'll pull it out. There'll be a big sell-off, of a stock, and then that stock price will go down because there's not a big demand for it. And as a result, those people's net worth go down, They were making a big deal because they said Elon Musk's net worth dropped by like $40 billion. Poor guy, poor guy. Still worth 300 something billion dollars. I don't know how he survives. I really don't know how he survives, But people will. The public does look at those things, and depending on their trustworthiness of a particular stock or what's taking place in that company will determine where they put their money at, right? Because people do work hard for their money and they don't want to waste it. So at the peak of the company's success, Enron was worth approximately $70 billion. And remember, this was back in 2001, where at least where this was written, at the peak of its success, it was worth $70 billion. So this was, 24 years ago, which would probably be like 200 or 300 billion now. It employed nearly 21,000 people worldwide. Now think about that, because when this company collapsed and filed for bankruptcy, pretty much all those people lost their jobs. And when you think about it employed 21,000 people, it doesn't just stop at those 21,000 people, because they probably had husbands or wives or children or possibly other dependents that they were taking care of, right? What if the average family had 4 people? Now multiply that 21,000 by 4, right? And you quickly see how many people that affected. Over 80,000 people, 84,000 people that were affected by one company collapsing as a result of some bad decisions of a few. And it boasted over $100 billion a year of profits, and had projects in India, South America, Asia, and Europe. Now, with $100 billion in profits, how could this company go bankrupt? Although this case is still under investigation and all the intricacies of the fall of this billion-dollar corporation have yet to come to light, enough details have been divulged to know that several top executives within the company defrauded investors and laundered money, which was then embezzled into their private bank accounts by creating partnerships with companies they had created and using those partnerships to hide high debts. They hid high debts. And the fact that they were stealing money from the company, and people will creatively do this, they'll create shell companies and things like that, and they'll try to hide their money in offshore accounts and things like that, to cover up the fact that they're really losing money very quickly. And the fact here that they were stealing from the company, which was Enron. When Enron declared bankruptcy on December 2nd, 2021, thousands of people were suddenly out of work, and thousands of investors lost billions of dollars as the worth of this billion-dollar company rapidly decreased. And let's see here. Do I have that in here? Let me see. Nah, it doesn't look like it. All right. So we can see here, how quickly that can affect not only the public's opinion, but how that ripple, we talked about that ripple effect, how that rippled out and affected not only the community, but the people who depended. Remember, these people were suddenly out of a job. Imagine living your life, going through your life, you know, having your needs met, doing your job faithfully and honestly and diligently, knowing that, you're going to go to work, you're going to do your job, and at the end of the week or whatever it's appointed, you're going to get your paycheck, and your paycheck is going to help you to continue to take care of your family. All of a sudden, done. No more. No severance pay, no PTO, no paid time off or anything like that. Nothing. It's just all gone. Okay? And it probably threw these people's lives in a complete upheaval because they didn't have the main resource that they needed to survive, you know? And I don't really know how a lot of these people were affected. Some of these people probably themselves had to file bankruptcy because they couldn't afford many of the things. Most people in America are one paycheck away from broke. Even these high six-figure earners, they're one paycheck away from broke. I was talking to a guy some years back, and he was, I don't know, I would say he was pretty successful. He's probably doing mid-high six figures a year, in business, probably close to low seven figures. And I was talking to him about things because he was waiting to get some payments from some customers and so forth. And he goes, I run this business and I run this company, but I literally live paycheck to paycheck too. I was like, man, So, and I don't really know everything that was behind it. And, I'm not saying he mismanaged his money and so forth, but businesses can have those ebbs and flows, from time to time, But when there's dishonesty, you can guarantee it's eventually going to catch up and it's going to go down really quick. So it says here at the bottom, it says, keep in mind that the collapse of the Enron Corporation, although the largest in America's history to date, is not the only corporation that has recently filed for bankruptcy because of dishonest practices of those in leadership positions. Although many businesses are run by honest people who are ethical in their business dealings, the problem of unethical business practices has become more common and is therefore of grave concern to our governmental leaders. Our governmental leaders, our society, and our nation. And just to read you real quick here, there's some other companies that actually had some sufferings as a result of dishonesty within the corporation. In March of 2017, the Department of Justice criminally indicted the CMED founder and CEO, as well as the former chief financial officer, charging them with securities fraud and wire transfer conspiracy for stealing more than $400 million from investors as part of a 7-year scheme. They probably thought, we're making it, everything's going smoothly. $400 million, people are continually investing in. In 1984, Lincoln Savings and Loan. It was a Phoenix-based construction company acquired Lincoln Savings and Loans in 1984 and made billions by selling Lincoln customers $200 million worth of unsecured junk bonds. The great times didn't last long, though. The owner was convicted on federal racketeering charges related to defrauding investors. Of course, those charges were later thrown out, according to NBC News. His company went bankrupt in the process, and the demise of the Lincoln Savings and Loan was the costliest savings and loan debacle of the 1980s. Then there was E.F. Hutton here, which is an investment firm best known for its advertising slogan, "When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen." Well, the company was well regarded during the early 1980s. Why was it well regarded? Because it had a very positive reputation in the eyes of the public, but ran into trouble midway through the decade when it pleaded guilty to 2,000 counts of mail and wire fraud. E.F. Hutton admitted to taking part in kiting, I'm not sure if that's pronounced right, scheme that involved making bank withdrawals and deposits that gave it illegal access to millions of interest-free dollars. It paid more than $10 million in penalties as a result. Money reported, which is the publication, Money reported. Following the 1987 stock market crash, E.F. Hutton brand disappeared among a series of mergers and so forth. So we see, there have been other companies that have had this fall, but remember, a company is just an entity. It's the people who are in the company that determine the success or the failure of it. And CEOs or presidents and so forth, they're just people. And of course, their actions reflect their character. And of course, like we talked about earlier in the class, there are many, many, many things that contribute to the development or the formation of that character. Some things that they might not even realize until it was too late. And even those who actually were convicted or indicted, or some sent to prison, some had to just pay back things, I don't even know if they realize the bad choices that they made. Some people just think the bad choice was the last one that got me caught. I shouldn't have taken that one last cookie out the cookie jar and I wouldn't have got caught. Well, no, you were making a series of bad choices that started with not necessarily the thought, but the decision to act on the thought to do something immoral. Okay, because thoughts, remember, enter into our mind at the speed of light. But it's the choices, the decisions we make that determine the outcome of our lives. Okay, because you can have a negative thought and you can push it out. You can throw it away. Nope, that would do harm to myself and others. That would ruin my reputation. That would cause people to lose trust in me and so forth. Or you can entertain it and then, as a result, suffer the consequences. And then there's a few others here. There are some CEOs whose actions reflected their character. Weinstein, that was a Weinstein company. They were ousted from their company, and the reason they was because of sexual assault, harassment, and misconduct. Of course, this case catalyzed, if you remember back in 2017, the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement was a big thing, and it's not always as a result of stealing, but they are immoral choices that come as a result of immoral character. The Peregrine Financial Group was another company there. That leader or that CEO was ousted because of embezzlement and fraud. And it was interesting because after admitting that he'd lied to investors, employees, regulators, and family members for nearly 2 decades, the CEO even attempted suicide as investigators closed in on his fraud. One of the only positive things that was said about this ex-CEO at trial came from U.S. Congressman David Nagel, who told the judge that sometimes good people do bad things. But when other people's livelihoods and millions of dollars are at stake, the CEO's story is evidence of the fact that your actions matter more than the alleged quality of your character. And I thought that was an interesting statement there because your actions are a reflection of your character, right? But like they say, the alleged quality of your character. In other words, sometimes people will put on a facade, a fake face to make you think that they're someone or something that they're not. Even one of the CEOs of Yahoo, the internet service provider, he was ousted not because he was involved in racketeering or embezzlement or sexual harassment or anything like that. He was ousted he was accused of adding a fake computer science degree to his resume. And of course, these things aren't hard to track and trace, no matter how bad you want the job, if you lie, eventually it's going to be found out. So these are just some of the things that take place in the financial world, the business world, that takes place on a regular basis. George W. Bush, back on page 193, the President of the United States gave a speech concerning the role of positive character on the economy. The President made the following remarks concerning corporate responsibility. He says, quote, on page 194, I've come to the financial capital of the world to speak of a serious challenge to corporate markets and to the confidence on which they rest. The misdeeds now being uncovered in some quarters of corporate America are threatening the financial well-being of many workers and many investors. At this moment, America's greatest economic need is ethical standards. Standards enforced by strict laws and upheld by responsible leaders. Now, sometimes, political leaders look at strict laws as, we need to make it harsher sentences for people who commit particular crimes, right? Well, the fact is, America has the largest prison population in the world. Over 2 million people, incarcerated in America between local and federal prisons. And we operate under some pretty strict and harsh laws, right? Strict punishments, I should say. Strict punishments. But punishments don't cause people to value morality, right? You have to teach them and train them and give them the space to put these things into practice. And of course, they have to see the benefit for themselves, right? They really do. They have to experience these things and see the benefit for themselves. You can't force somebody. Even when they take a person and incarcerate them, they don't force them to be a great role model citizen. In fact, some people actually develop worse characteristics in that type of environment. Not everybody. Some people learn and they try to do better. But of course, education is the key. The American economy, our economy, he continues in his speech here, is built on confidence, and that confidence is well placed. After all, American technology is the most advanced in the world. We have much to be confident about in America. Yet our economy and our country need one more kind of confidence. Confidence in the character and conduct of all our corporate leaders. The American business leaders are being undermined. Okay? Nearly every week there is bad economic news and a discovery of fraud and scandal. Problems long in the making now come to light. We've learned of some business leaders obstructing justice and misleading clients, falsifying records, business executives breaching the trust and abusing power. We have learned of CEOs earning tens of millions of dollars in bonuses just before their corporations went bankrupt, leaving employees and retirees and investors to suffer. The vast majority of businessmen and women are honest. They do right by their investors. They do not cut ethical corners, and their work helps to create a strong economy, which is the envy of the world. Yet high-profile acts of deception have shaken people's trust, and these scandals have hurt the reputation of many honest companies. They have hurt the stock market, and worst of all, they are hurting millions of people who depend on the integrity of businesses for their future and their retirement, for their peace of mind and their financial well-being. Well, and that concludes his speech there. Well, that's the thing we were talking about there at the very beginning, with people making investments and people getting jobs, and then as a result, they can, put their money into pensions and retirement. But what occurs when the company is dishonest and all the money that you put into that retirement is now lost? Now you're going to find your next 35 years or however long it is working until the day that you're not able to work anymore, not even really being able to enjoy life or to eat of the fruits of your labors. So we're going to stop right there on page 194, and we'll pick up, David should be, hopefully, we'll be picking up on page 195 as we look at the positive and negative character traits here. And the next class will be this upcoming Sunday, which will be March 16th. We'll be meeting again at 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. I do thank you all for watching and joining us. Hope you have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you at the next class.